The first warning sign arrived like a whisper instead of an explosion. A double beep, a soft, harmless sound, a sound no one in a busy cafe would ever notice. But for me, it was the sound of the ground beginning to crack beneath my feet. "Sir, it declined again." The barista's voice was soft, almost apologetic, her cheeks warming with embarrassment. I blinked at her, confused. "Declined? That can't be right. I used this card yesterday." She ran it a second time. Another beep, sharper this time, like a tiny electric sting. "Terminal says to contact your bank," she said, lowering her voice as the woman behind me shifted impatiently. My morning coffee, once an unremarkable ritual, suddenly felt out of reach, like something on the other side of a glass wall. I shook my head gently. "Keep the coffee," I murmured. "I'll figure this out." Outside, the February breeze sliced through my jogging jacket. Peachtree Coffee House buzzed behind me. Steam hissed, conversations rose and fell. Life continued unaffected. But inside me, a quiet unease was beginning to uncurl. At the ATM, I inserted one card, then another, and another. Same message every time. Card services temporarily unavailable. Contact your financial institution. My pulse thudded faintly, not panic, just the unfamiliar tug of something out of place. I'd been a law professor for 33 years. Problems had roots, solutions had structure. This would be corrected, surely. At 9:30 a.m. I stood inside the SunTrust branch, damp from my jog, wearing the same gray jacket I'd owned for 15 years. I approached a young representative whose quick fingers flew across her keyboard as I explained. "I need to understand," I said slowly, "what freeze initiated by third party means." Her eyes skimmed the screen, her brow pinched. "Someone with authorized access froze your account." "I am the only account holder." Her lips pressed into an uncomfortable line. "Protocols were followed, Mr. Nichols." "Then your protocols are flawed." She clicked through more screens, each click a tiny shovelful of dirt landing on my patience. "It may take up to 72 hours to investigate." 3 days, without access to my money. I snapped a picture of her screen before she could hide it. Red flag notation. Third-party freeze request. As I walked to my car, a memory drifted to the surface. Slow, sticky, unwelcome. Austin, my only son, had visited in January, all casual charm. "Dad, you're not getting younger," he had said lightly. "Let me set up emergency access to your accounts, just in case." I refused, not unkindly, just firmly. "My affairs are in order," I told him. "I don't need a guardian." Apparently he disagreed. I drove home, passing Maple Ridge Drive. Austin's rental house sat quiet under the morning sun. A calm, ordinary home for a calm, ordinary life. A home he rented from a landlord he never bothered to learn. His own father. I didn't stop. Not yet. At home, I made coffee with a $20 bill I'd kept for emergencies. I wiped down the kitchen counters twice, reorganized my mail into neat stacks, filled the silence with routine, because acknowledging what I suspected felt like stepping off a cliff. Evening settled. 7 o'clock p.m. The phone rang. I answered. No greeting, only triumph, pure, unfiltered triumph, dripping from every syllable. "So," Austin said, "did you try buying anything today?" I swallowed the boiling anger. "My cards aren't working." He laughed, a laugh I had never heard from him before. Cruel, delighted, predatory. "I blocked them. Every single one." "You did what?" "Now you'll have to beg me even to buy bread. Maybe now you'll understand who has the power here, old man." "Old man." I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. Calm, controlled, surgical. "That's all you have to say?" he snapped. "No pleading?" He was waiting for fear, for collapse, for control. "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable," he finished, almost giddy. The line clicked dead. I sat there, phone pressed against my ear, listening to the dial tone, not grieving, not afraid. Something colder replaced the confusion. Sharp, focused, a blade forging in ice. My filing cabinet gleamed faintly across the room. I walked to it slowly, opened the second drawer, and pulled out a folder. Horizon Property Management. Lease agreements. I flipped it through pages until I found it. Tenant names, Austin Nichols and Velma Nichols. Lease term, month to month. Landlord, Orrin Nichols, trust. 2 years. They had lived in my house for 2 years, and they never knew. I laid the documents on my dining table, arranged them like evidence exhibits. The law professor in me, buried but not dead, awoke with eerie clarity. I pulled a legal pad toward me. Page after page filled with tight, neat handwriting. Patterns emerged. Austin's sudden financial concern, Velma's probing questions about my portfolio, the freeze, the smug voice, the threat. By 3 a.m., I had a timeline, a motive, a strategy. By 6 a.m., I banged them. I stopped pretending to sleep. I photographed every document, downloaded bank records, highlighted Georgia's statutes on elder financial exploitation, reviewed one-party recording consent laws, and then I made the call. "Logan," I said when my former student answered, "I need to consult you about elder financial abuse procedures." "Of course, Professor. Anything." His trust, his respect, still intact after all these years. He didn't know that this wasn't a hypothetical. By afternoon, I had everything I needed. The law, the documents, the recordings, the leverage. Control, the evidence. Control the outcome. The first rule I taught every student. At 8 a.m. the next day, I stood in the SunTrust Tower, briefcase in hand, demanding to see the manager. By noon, I had internal reports, apologies, and an admission of fraud by a bank employee, Austin's college friend. By 2 p.m. I filed a police report. By 4 p.m. I served a lease termination notice to my own son. He had given me a lesson about power, but he'd forgotten who taught him the meaning of the word. That night at my dining table, I crossed off 2 items on my legal pad. Accounts restored, eviction filed. I circled one final date, May 1st, move-out deadline. And as I sipped my evening coffee, my phone buzzed on cue. Austin's name. Fury behind it. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Marcus got fired. The blocks are gone." "Actions have consequences," I replied calmly. "You're destroying people's lives." "I'm protecting mine." A pause, then his voice darkened. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed, "it's not." He hung up. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Texts, one after another. "You'll regret this. I'll ruin you. That house should be mine. Your pension should be mine. Everything you have should be mine." I saved every one. Evidence. When Velma finally called, her voice was coated in fake sweetness. "Dad, Austin said you're confused about your accounts." "No confusion," I cut in. "Just deliberate fraud, now under police investigation." "Oh, come on, you're getting older. You might be misunderstanding." "Stop. I'm 67, not senile, and I don't need your help." I ended the call. The house was quiet again, but the war had already begun, and I wasn't the one who should be afraid. The morning light crept slowly across my dining table, illuminating the organized chaos I had created overnight. Every sheet of paper, every photograph, every bank statement, every lease agreement had a place, a purpose, a story. The coffee I brewed in the small French press steamed faintly beside me, forgotten while I immersed myself in the evidence. Each document felt heavier than the last, not because of its physical weight, but because of the implications it carried. My son, Austin, the child I had raised, had turned his hands against me. The first item on my checklist, document the freeze and the unauthorized third-party access. The bank's internal screenshots, time-stamped and clear, were damning. The words flashed repeatedly in my mind. Freeze initiated by authorized third party. Authorized third party, neither applied to Austin, and I was the only account holder. I leaned back in my chair, fingers interlacing over my chest, eyes closing briefly. 33 years of teaching law had never prepared me for this personal betrayal. Yet the skills, the discipline, the relentless precision, they all came flooding back. Evidence, timeline, procedure, a pattern forming like the slow development of photographs in a dark room. The first hint of realization arrived in small, unassuming details. Austin's January visit. "Just in case something happens to you, Dad." His words had seemed reasonable at the time, polite even, but now, in hindsight, they were the opening maneuver in a game of deception I hadn't agreed to play. Then Velma. She had subtly inquired about dividends last Thanksgiving, innocuous questions to the untrained eye, but any lawyer, any detective, would see the pattern immediately. Months of observation, probing, preparation, all leading to this freeze, this assertion of power. I started constructing a timeline, each event a thread in a growing tapestry of intent and manipulation. I wrote down dates, cross-referenced emails, and noted conversations I'd had. January 14th, 2025, Austin's casual Sunday visit. February 2nd, first indication of unusual bank activity. February 27th, the morning I discovered the freeze. By 10 a.m., I had already identified the key items required to establish elder financial abuse: documentation of the freeze, account statements showing normal activity, phone recordings of threats, witness testimony if possible. Each category neatly tabulated in columns on my legal pad. And then there was the property. 2847 Maple Ridge Drive, the house Austin had rented under my trust. The knowledge that he had lived there for 2 years without any of his own funds paying the lease, yet now using my authority as leverage, added a chilling layer of personal violation. I cross-checked the lease agreement, verifying that it was a month-to-month tenancy. Georgia law was precise. 60 days notice, no cause required. Every statute, every clause aligned perfectly with what I planned to do next. By 11 a.m., I had compiled a preliminary evidence package: photographs of lease agreements, bank statements, red flag screenshots from SunTrust, phone recordings of Austin's threats, notes detailing all suspicious interactions over the past 2 years. Everything labeled meticulously, each piece cross-referenced with date and source. No one would be able to argue with the clarity of this compilation. At noon, I opened a new checking account at the Credit Union of Georgia. 30 minutes. Identification. Cash deposit. Done. Austin could block what he knew about, but not what he didn't. Returning home, I made a habit of reviewing every document again. Evidence of careful planning, not panic. Each detail mattered. Every question, every scenario needed an answer. The afternoon passed slowly but methodically. I checked Georgia Code Section 165101 for theft by deception, Section 352 for exploitation of elder persons, and even the rules regarding one-party consent recordings. Each statute bolstered my position, a legal foundation, to counter Austin's audacious manipulation. By 3 p.m., I had a complete strategy. Phase 1, document everything. Phase 2, regain control of finances. Phase 3, terminate the lease on Maple Ridge Drive. Phase 4, prepare evidence for potential criminal prosecution. Every phase mapped with timelines, objectives, and contingencies. I took a brief break. My hands itched to move, to act, but the law demanded patience. Rushing would create mistakes, and mistakes would give Austin leverage. Instead, I sipped cold coffee and reviewed my notes. Patterns became more distinct. Motive, opportunity, action, consequence. By 5 p.m., I began drafting letters to the bank, to the property management company, and a potential statement for law enforcement. I wrote clearly, concisely, leaving no room for ambiguity. And then the phone rang. Velma. Her voice was soft, almost sweet. "Dad, I heard there was some confusion with your accounts." I didn't flinch. "Deliberate interference," I replied. "Under investigation." "No confusion here." There was a pause, then carefully measured. "Well, we just thought we could help make things simpler for you." "Thank you," I said, "but your assistance is neither needed nor welcome." She exhaled lightly. "We just want to help." I hung up. The warmth of the day had drained away. The house was silent. I spread my legal pad across the dining table again and began sketching a precise flow of events. I noted the relationships, the sequence of interactions, the legal consequences. I was creating a map, a blueprint of accountability. By 8 p.m., the first stage was nearly complete. Every document photographed, scanned, backed up. Every call logged, every statement timestamped. My files numbered, labeled, color-coded. Red folders for urgent actions, yellow for observations, blue for evidence requiring verification. I stood by the window and looked at the street. Maple Ridge Drive lay quiet, indifferent to the turmoil in my mind. I realized something essential. Austin thought he had power. He thought the freeze, the blocked cards, the threats gave him control. But he underestimated one thing: preparation, clarity, patience in the law. And I had all four. By 10 p.m., I was drafting a formal timeline of events, converting shorthand notes into a polished document suitable for submission to the police or courts. Every interaction, every suspicious question, every unauthorized action meticulously logged. Then, as midnight approached, I paused. My hands were cramped, my eyes tired, but the satisfaction of clarity burned warmer than fatigue. I had the blueprint. I had the plan. I had the law firmly on my side. The battle lines were drawn. Austin had made his move. But for the first time since the freeze, I knew the truth. He was not in control. I reviewed my notes one final time and checked the clock. 12:47 a.m., February 28th, tomorrow would be the beginning of Phase 2, the restoration of my accounts, the formal bank complaint, and the first steps toward reclaiming the property Austin had dared to occupy under my name. I set my pen down, feeling a rare calm. The house was quiet again. The war had not yet begun, but when it did, Austin would not be ready. The next morning arrived without ceremony, the sunlight creeping across the kitchen counters, painting them in sharp lines of clarity. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the worn handle and tiny chip, and took a slow sip, savoring the warmth and the predictability of its bitterness. Predictability, a luxury in contrast to Austin's reckless unpredictability, was the weapon I intended to wield. I reviewed my checklist. Phase 2, bank restoration, internal investigation, and preparation of evidence for civil and criminal action. Everything was mapped, every step accounted for. No improvisation, no emotion-driven decisions. The law, not anger, would be my sword. At 8 a.m., I arrived at the SunTrust Tower, briefcase in hand, containing copies of every document, every screenshot, every email, every recording. My approach was methodical. Present facts, maintain composure, document the reaction. I had taught generations of law students that evidence, not emotion, was absolute power. Now it was my turn to apply that principle. The receptionist's smile faltered as I approached. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, a hint of curiosity beneath the standard professional tone. "No appointment," I replied evenly. "I have documented evidence of financial fraud involving your institution. I can wait for the appropriate officer or proceed directly to federal regulators." Her fingers flew to the phone, and within minutes I was seated across from Marcus Patterson, branch manager, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Peachtree Street. He was younger than I expected, confident, polished, but there was a subtle tightness in his jaw. He could sense the seriousness radiating from the small man sitting before him. "Mr. Nichols, can you explain the nature of your complaint?" Patterson asked. I began unfolding my evidence systematically: bank statements, screenshots, recordings of Austin's threats, a written timeline spanning months of careful observation. I placed each document in chronological order across the table, creating a visual map of the fraud. "Someone froze my accounts without authorization," I said. "Your representative confirmed it was a third party. I never provided consent. I demand to see the documentation authorizing this action." Patterson scrolled through his tablet, frowning. "I'll need to investigate the request chain." I interrupted politely but firmly. "You have 48 hours before I escalate to the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, and the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance." His confident posture faltered slightly. He realized he was no longer dealing with a typical customer complaint. This was an expert, a retired law professor, with decades of experience in evidence and procedure, every word backed by documentation. "I need to review this properly," he said. I nodded. "Good, let him review." But he knew the clock was ticking. I pressed play on my phone. Austin's voice, triumphant, recorded 2 days after the freeze. "I blocked them. Every single one, he had said, the arrogance and cruelty unmistakable. Patterson's face paled. May I have a copy? He asked. I'll provide it to my investigators. Yes, I said, handing over the files, along with photographs of your system screen showing the third-party notation. Everything documented. The next 48 hours were painstaking. I monitored emails, reviewed procedural correspondence, and organized my legal pad with razor precision. Notes, timelines, and references arranged in straight lines. Evidence was no longer abstract. It was an unbreakable chain. Then the call came. Marcus Webb, the junior account officer, had processed the freeze. The reason? A family member expressing concern over alleged cognitive decline. Austin, no power of attorney, no verification protocol. Just a casual favor. Webb was terminated immediately, my accounts restored. Compensation was offered for inconvenience. I declined the money but secured copies of the internal investigation, a critical addition to my growing dossier. With the banking issue resolved, I turned to property. 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. Austin had lived there under my trust for 2 years. His assumption of ownership was presumptuous at best, criminal at worst. Phase 3, eviction and termination of lease. I called Horizon Property Management. Their after-hours line connected quickly. This is Orrin Nichols, I said. I own the property at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive through my trust. I'd like to terminate the current lease. Yes, Mr. Nichols, verification is required. Please provide property ID and trust documentation in person. I arranged my schedule meticulously. The following morning, 8 o'clock a.m., I would arrive with documents prepared for scrutiny. Every interaction pre-planned, every step deliberate. Back home, I transferred key points from the internal investigation into a master folder. Evidence, timeline, and proposed actions were organized in 3 columns, each piece labeled with date, source, and relevance. I felt the familiar weight of control returning. The chaos imposed by Austin was being dismantled, brick by brick, fact by fact. The day passed in a rhythm of preparation. Calls were scripted, letters drafted, evidence reviewed and cross-referenced. I made sure every scenario, every potential rebuttal was anticipated. Legal citations highlighted, documents numbered, photographs indexed. By evening, my home office resembled a law library under siege. Stacks of papers, open statute books, laptops humming with scanned evidence. Austin's calls came later that evening, as predicted. Rage laced every word, each sentence a desperate attempt to regain leverage. You're destroying people's lives, he shouted. I'm protecting mine, I replied calmly. He threatened, as he always did. I recorded, time-stamped, saved, documented. The law was my shield. Preparation, my weapon. By nightfall, every move I would make in the coming weeks was mapped. Bank restoration confirmed. Evidence package complete. Lease termination letter drafted. Police report ready for submission. Every contingency accounted for. I reviewed my notes again. Phase 2 was complete. Phase 3, the formal eviction, would begin in less than 24 hours. Austin believed he still held control, still had the power. He was blissfully unaware that the machinery of consequence had already started, grinding forward with precision. I made one last cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. I sipped slowly, savoring the quiet. Control had returned to my hands. The law had returned it, and Austin had no idea. The first chapter of reclaiming my life was complete. The war had begun, but I was prepared. For once in my life, the rules favored the disciplined, the patient, the meticulous, and I had spent a lifetime perfecting all 3. The morning sun hit the horizon with a muted gold, casting long shadows across my dining room. I sat at my table reviewing the eviction notice one final time. The lease termination letter, typed on official letterhead and signed with my full legal signature, rested neatly atop a stack of supporting documents. Everything aligned with Georgia law. Month-to-month tenancy, 60 days notice, no cause required, perfectly airtight. I double-checked the certified mail receipts. 3 copies of the letter, one for Horizon Property Management, one for my files, and one for the tenants. each signed, dated, and ready for dispatch. The mechanics of justice were simple. The only variable left was human pride, Austin's. By 8 o'clock a.m., I drove through Atlanta traffic to Horizon's Buckhead office. My briefcase contained all trust documentation, photo identification, in a neatly labeled folder for the administrator. The morning air smelled of early spring, fresh, almost indifferent to the drama about to unfold. The receptionist, efficient as ever, barely looked up as I approached. "Mr. Nichols, may I help you?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "I am here to serve a lease termination notice for tenants Austin and Velma Nichols. I own the property through my trust." She gestured toward a small office. I set my briefcase down, producing the documents. "All documentation verifying my ownership is included. Please process accordingly." She examined my trust papers, compared IDs, verified the lease information against their records. "Everything is in order," she said. "Bonus effective today, March 2nd. Tenants must vacate by May 1st. We'll send certified letters requiring signatures within 3 business days." I nodded. "Understood. Thank you." Every procedural step executed, each action documented, a machine of consequence moving inexorably forward. Back in my car, I calculated the timeline. Austin would spend the next 2 weeks believing he still held leverage, believing the freeze had given him dominance, believing that I was cornered. Little did he know the illusion was already broken. At home, I returned to my evidence files. The internal bank investigation confirmed Marcus Webb's unauthorized participation in Austin's manipulation. Police reports were ready, and all phone recordings neatly labeled with timestamps. Every piece of correspondence logged. Evidence and law aligned with surgical precision. Then the calls began. Austin first. Fury radiating through the line. "What did you do? Marcus got fired? The blocks are gone." I sipped coffee, unflinching. "Actions have consequences. You should have considered them before interfering with my accounts." His voice climbed in desperation and frustration. "You're destroying everything. That house, my future, my inheritance." "No," I replied calmly. "I am reclaiming my life. You assumed control that wasn't yours. That ends now." The line went silent, then lower, darker. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed. "It's not." He hung up. I recorded the call, cataloging it in my evidence folder. Every interaction became another link in the chain of accountability. 2 hours later, the text arrived. Austin, escalating in fury, every message captured, time-stamped, and organized. Threats, insults, claims of entitlement, attempts to intimidate. 23 messages in total over the next 48 hours, each more desperate than the last. Evidence of harassment, escalation, a pattern unmistakable to anyone trained in the law. Velma called next, her voice syrupy, deceptive. "Dad, I thought there was some confusion with your accounts. Maybe we could help." "Deliberate fraud," Amon said, "now under investigation. Your assistance is neither needed nor welcome." A pause. "We just want to make things simpler." "Stop. I am 67, not senile. Cognitive function intact. Your concern is neither needed nor appreciated." I hung up. She didn't realize that her soft attempts at manipulation were logged, cataloged, and would serve as evidence if necessary. By mid-afternoon, the certified letters had been dispatched. I made sure to keep copies, tracking numbers, and proof of mailing. Each step, each action, precise. By the time Austin received his first notice, he would already be trapped by his own arrogance. I checked the internal investigation from the bank again. Marcus Webb had been terminated. Policies rewritten. All actions fully documented. Any attempt by Austin to argue or manipulate would fail. The law, the evidence, and my meticulous records ensured it. Yet, the tension lingered. Austin believed in his temporary power, in the leverage of blocked accounts and threats. But I had built a system of accountability he could not undermine. My mind mapped every scenario he might attempt next. Aggressive calls, legal threats, social manipulation, even attempts to undermine my credibility. Every potential move already countered by documentation, timeline, and legal statutes. By evening, I sat with a legal pad before me, reviewing Phase 4. Potential criminal charges. elder financial exploitation, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. Each documented act, timestamped and corroborated by evidence, lined up perfectly. The police had a case in progress. Austin's calls and texts were recorded, cataloged, and ready for submission. The house was quiet. The warmth of early spring filtered through the blinds. I sipped coffee and reviewed my notes. Everything was in place. Control restored. Leverage reclaimed. The final satisfaction, however, was more personal than procedural. I realized that Austin's illusions of power had been dismantled without violence, without rash action. Evidence, law, patience, my tools, not his threats, had restored the balance. I allowed myself a small smile. The illusion of control had always been his strength. I had taken it from him not with anger, not with fear, but with preparation, strategy, discipline. By 10 o'clock p.m., the last check was complete. Notes filed, evidence secured, lease termination verified, police report logged. The battle had shifted. Austin still believed he was in command, but the machinery of consequences had already begun grinding. I poured a final cup of coffee, black, strong, methodical. I watched the quiet streets of Atlanta from my window. The war was far from over. Austin would push, would threaten, would rage, but each of his moves now played into my plan. I was patient. I was prepared. I was unshakable. And when May 1st arrived, the illusion of power would be gone entirely. The first morning of May dawned crisp and clear. Atlanta streets bathed in soft golden sunlight. The rhythm of the city continued, unaware of the storm about to descend on Maple Ridge Drive. I sat at my dining table reviewing the calendar, and a subtle satisfaction settled over me. May 1st, the date Austin and Velma were legally required to vacate my property. I poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug and sipped slowly, savoring the warmth and the calm. Everything had been meticulously executed. Bank accounts restored, lease termination notices delivered, police reports filed, evidence cataloged. The law was on my side, and the illusion of Austin's power had already crumbled in every meaningful sense. I reviewed my notes one last time. Timeline, evidence, correspondence, recordings, every phone call, every text message, every bank freeze, all carefully documented. Nothing relied on memory or speculation. The pattern of exploitation, harassment, and manipulation was irrefutable. By 8 o'clock a.m., I was on Maple Ridge Drive. The neighborhood was quiet, early spring sunlight filtering through the oaks. I parked my car a short distance from the rental property and retrieved my briefcase. Inside, all documentation and certified notices were arranged in neat folders. Today was not a confrontation, it was enforcement. The front door bore a small, certified mail receipt taped discreetly beside the knob. Austin and Velma had been officially notified weeks ago. The law now demanded action. I walked up the steps, briefcase in hand, and rang the doorbell. The door swung open. Austin's face, pale and incredulous, mirrored the shock I had long anticipated. Velma lingered behind him, feigning casual curiosity, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed panic. "Dad," Austin began, voice tight, trying to mask fear with anger. "What are you doing here?" I held my briefcase calmly. "I am enforcing the lease termination. Today is May 1st. You are required to vacate the property." He blinked rapidly. "But this isn't legal. You can't just—" I cut him off, voice even, measured. "Certified notice was delivered weeks ago. The landlord has exercised their rights under Georgia law. Month-to-month tenancy, 60 days notice, no cause required. The law is clear. Your occupancy is now unauthorized." Velma stepped forward, attempting a soft approach. "Oren, maybe we can work something out?" "No," I said firmly. "There is nothing to negotiate. The law and your actions dictate the outcome." Austin's jaw clenched. "You'll regret this. You'll lose everything. That house, your money, your life savings, it'll all be mine." I smiled faintly, almost indulgently. "You overestimate your control. Everything is documented, the bank freeze, the threats, your manipulation. The police have been notified. Consequences follow actions. His face twisted with rage, but I held my ground. Years of courtroom experience had trained me to remain calm, authoritative, unflinching. Silence was my ally. I stepped forward and presented the folder of documentation. All notices, evidence, and legal documentation are here. You will vacate by the end of the day. Police have been informed. Any attempt to resist will be recorded and added to the evidence file. Austin's fists tightened at his sides. Velma's expression faltered. They realized finally that their leverage, temporary, ill-gained, was gone. I left the folder on the counter, turned and walked to my car. The afternoon passed slowly, measured while I monitored developments remotely. Certified receipts confirmed removal of personal property. Photos from a trusted neighbor documented the process. Police officers were on standby, ready to ensure compliance if needed. By evening, the house was empty. Every item removed, every key returned. The property, once a symbol of Austin's audacious overreach, now stood silent, secure, and fully under my control. At home, I updated my evidence files. The bank documents, police reports, recordings, and lease enforcement actions were cataloged in an ironclad archive. Every step, every action, meticulously documented. The story of exploitation, harassment, and resolution was complete. Then came the final communication. A voicemail from Austin, desperate, furious, defeated. His words tumbled over themselves, threats and accusations intermingled. I saved the recording, time-stamped it, and added it to the evidence folder. It was the last piece of the puzzle, acknowledgement of defeat, proof of escalation, and confirmation that all legal actions had achieved their intended effect. Velma sent a text later that evening, her tone syrupy, apologetic, almost conciliatory. "We misunderstood. No further action." I screenshot the message, labeled it, and filed it. Even in retreat, the documentation added to the irrefutable record. Sitting back in my chair, I felt a rare sense of satisfaction. Months of meticulous preparation, observation, documentation, and legal precision had restored balance. My life, my property, my finances, all secure once more. Austin and Velma had been constrained by law and procedure, their attempts to exert power dismantled methodically and decisively. I brewed another cup of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen. Silence reigned. The house was quiet. Maple Ridge Drive, indifferent to the human drama, reflected only sunlight and the slow movement of spring leaves. I allowed myself a small smile. Control had been reclaimed not with anger, not with rash action, but with patience, preparation, and adherence to the law. Every move I had anticipated, every scenario I had planned for, had played out exactly as intended. And as I sipped the last of my coffee, I realized something crucial. True power does not come from threats, manipulation, or temporary control. True power comes from preparation, understanding, and the unwavering application of principle. Austin and Velma had sought to impose chaos, to leverage temporary advantage, to intimidate. They had failed. The law had reinforced order, and my discipline had enforced it. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the window. Atlanta's skyline glowed in the evening light. The war was over. The consequences had been delivered. Justice, methodical, patient, inevitable, had prevailed. In that quiet moment, I allowed myself to feel something that had been absent for months. Relief. Not triumph in the vulgar sense, not satisfaction and revenge, but calm. The equilibrium had been restored. The lessons of decades taught in courtrooms and lecture halls had been applied in the most personal of arenas. Evidence mattered. Documentation mattered. Patience mattered. And above all, control, true control, was maintained not by force but by preparation and adherence to principle. The final page of the story at last had been written, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to savor the simple pleasure of unbroken peace. The war was over. I had won.